Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a truly unique and I think a defining moment in cyber history right now.
It really feels that way.
The front lines of security aren't just shifting to accommodate new technology. I mean, they're expanding into the core architectural components that are, powering the entire AI revolution.
Right.
For you, the curious learner, who wants that shortcut to understanding not just the daily threat headlines, but the deep foundational flaws driving them, we have a fantastic stack of sources today.
Indeed.
Mm.
What makes our stack so fascinating today is the sheer contrast between the sources. It's really telling.
How so?
Well, on one hand, we have this recent, really comprehensive global threat intelligence report. It gives you that wide-angle snapshot of the current state of war, ransomware, nation-state hacktivism, massive data breaches, all the things that define late 2025.
The usual suspects, but at a bigger scale.
Exactly. But then, on the other hand, we have an intricate, super technical autopsy of a single, highly critical vulnerability. It's codenamed LangGrinch, and it strikes right at the computational heart of modern AI application infrastructure.
So our mission today is to connect those two distinct realities. We need to understand that collision. How are traditional financial and geopolitical threat actors now leveraging these foundational weaknesses in the very tools and frameworks like LangChain that we all rely on to build agentic AI?
And that's the key question, because this is where traditional application security or AppSec models are just hitting a wall.
We're not built for this.
Not at all.
So we're going to begin by establishing the breadth of the threat landscape. We'll break down some key global incidents, and then we will dedicate significant time to CVE 2025-68664, that's LangGrinch, to understand how a seemingly simple missing security check in a crucial Python package became a critical backdoor to system secrets and, potentially, remote code execution.
It's a complex and I think an absolutely essential story for anyone in this space.
Yeah.
So let's start with that global snapshot from the threat intelligence reports. The cyber landscape right now is it's defined by attacks that exhibit sheer volume and incredibly high impact.
And they're targeting critical infrastructure and these massive pools of personal data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this really establishes the context for why attackers are so motivated to find these subtle architectural flaws like LangGrinch. The payoff is enormous.
The first example that immediately jumped out at me, just because of its implications for public safety, was the ransomware attack on Romanian waters.
Yes.
That's the National Water Management Authority. I mean, when we talk about critical infrastructure, water supply has to be the most fundamental service there is.
Absolutely. And the scale of disruption here was significant. We're talking nearly 1,000 computer systems encrypted across their national and regional offices.
1,000 systems?
And this wasn't just, standard desktop machines. It hit core services like their databases, internal email systems, their web servers, and critically, their geographic information systems, their GIS.
Okay, so the GIS part is interesting. But I think the key detail you mentioned, and this really speaks to modern security architecture, is that clear distinction between operational technology, the OT, and information technology, the IT.
Precisely. The reports were very clear that the operational technology, the actual physical controls that manage water flow, purification, distribution, that was not impacted.
So the water was still flowing?
The water was flowing. They're often isolated on separate air-gapped networks for this exact reason. However, the IT disruption was still massive. I mean, just imagine the operational staff, the engineers, the planners, the maintenance crews, suddenly losing access to all their historical data.
All their communication channels, all their maps.
All their mapping systems, the GIS, they're flying blind.
Right, so they might still be able to pump water, but they can't effectively monitor the system's health. They can't dispatch maintenance crews properly or communicate about potential issues quickly. It's a paralyzing disruption to the critical decision-making processes, even if the physical plant is still technically functional.
It perfectly illustrates how ransomware groups find success. They hit the corporate backbone of these services to maximize leverage and pressure for a payout.
Okay, so that's the financial motive. Let's shift a bit. Moving from those profit-driven motives to more geopolitical concerns, the recent surge in hacktivism is just impossible to ignore.
It really is. And our sources detailed that high-profile cyber attack against La Poste, which is France's postal service.
And this one had clear attribution, right? It was claimed by the pro-Russian hacktivist group no-name 05716.
That's right.
We've tracked the rise of these groups for a while. They aren't looking for data to sell. They're looking for maximum visibility and political messaging by disrupting the daily lives of citizens.
That is the core distinction. The goal is disruption. not financial gain. And the impact was primarily digital service disruption. So online parcel tracking, which is essential for modern commerce, it was down.
And I imagine mail distribution logistics were hit too.
They were. And services for La Banque Postale, which is their banking arm, also suffered outages. So while no data compromise was reported, the attack's goal to create that widespread national inconvenience and to signal intent that was achieved by striking these core digital arteries of the state.
That is pure signaling. Now, let's pivot again, this time to pure financial and human cost. The confirmed data breach at the insurance giant Aflac. This just highlights the sheer scale of theft when money is the only driver.
The Aflac breach was genuinely staggering. It affected approximately, get this, her 22.7 million individuals in its U.S. business.
22.7 million. The size alone is shocking. But we have to focus on the type of data that was stolen.
Right. This wasn't just a list of email addresses. They lost insurance claims, detailed health data, and critically, Social Security numbers.
And that cocktail of data is just, it's identity theft gold. I mean, health data gives you intimate personal details. Claims history can be leveraged for these highly personalized, very convincing phishing attacks.
And the SSN is the master key for opening new lines of credit or filing fraudulent tax returns.
So what does it mean for you as a consumer when your health data is compromised? What's the long-term impact?
It means long-term risk. It means mandatory credit monitoring for years and years. Health data is especially toxic because unlike a credit card number, which you can cancel,
You can't change your medical history.
you can't change your medical history or your
Hmm.
Social Security number. The sensitive personal information has a very, very long shelf life on the dark web. And the attribution here, by the way, goes to the notorious scattered spider threat group.
They're known for targeting high-value personal data from large enterprises using really sophisticated social engineering and access methods.
That's their MO.
It's just a catastrophic level of exposure. Okay, the next incident introduces an element of complexity that is, well, it's becoming routine now. The supply chain vulnerability, illustrated by the breach at Nissan Motor Corporation's Fukuoka sales.
This is a perfect modern case study. So Nissan acknowledged a breach that exposed the personal information of approximately 21,000 customers.
Okay, so smaller scale but still significant. What kind of data?
The usual names, addresses, phone numbers, email, and some specific sales data. The good news is financial data was thankfully spared. But the real lesson here is the chain of compromise.
That's the part that needs unpacking, because this wasn't a direct hack on a Nissan laptop or server, was it?
No, not at all. The investigation traced the incident back to unauthorized access to Red Hat data servers.
Wow.
And Red Hat, as you know, is a major provider of open source enterprise operating system and infrastructure. They're a crucial vendor in the software ecosystem. The compromise appears to have happened at the hosting or managed service level provided by Red Hat, where Nissan's customer data was stored or being processed.
So, if Nissan trusts Red Hat to secure its data hosting environment, and Red Hat gets compromised, Nissan's customers are the ultimate victims. It just underscores that any provider in your infrastructure stack, no matter how trusted, represents a potential single point of failure.
And then we saw the classic monetization sequence play out. The initial attack was claimed by a group called the Crimson Collective. They were likely the ones responsible for gaining that initial access.
And then what happened?
Then, the stolen samples were hosted and advertised by Shiny Hunters, a group that's primarily focused on data leakage and monetization. This handoff from the initial intrusion to the public data dump is the standard supply chain consequence we see today.
It just reinforces this idea that supply chain risk is now systemic. Okay, finally, we saw a few critical examples targeting digital assets, which illustrates the high monetization potential of these, virtual economy.
Right. The Trust Wallet incident is a stark and, frankly, terrifying lesson in the fragility of interfaces. Trust Wallet, it's a non-custodial wallet, disclosed a $7 million loss across multiple users.
7 million. And the culprit was what? A compromised Chrome extension update?
Yes, specifically version 2.68.0. An attacker managed to slip malicious code into the legitimate update channel.
So people thought they were just getting a routine security patch or a feature update?
Exactly. But this code then executed on their browsers and exfiltrated sensitive wallet data, including the seed phrases, those 12 or 24 words that grant complete control over the wallet's contents.
$7 million lost because users trusted the update mechanism of a piece of software. It's a chilling reminder that you are only as secure as the furthest boundary of your digital access layer.
And it's not just crypto. On the gaming front, we saw the abuse of internal systems at Ubisoft. targeting Rainbow Six Siege.
And this isn't data theft in the traditional sense. This is theft of high-value digital currency and assets.
Exactly. Threat actors accessed internal administrative systems. They were able to manipulate bans, unlock developer-only cosmetic items, and distribute approximately $13.33 million worth of in-game currency worldwide.
13 million.
It just confirms that the internal systems controlling these virtual economies are massive targets because in-game currency holds real-world value. It can be laundered or resold for actual profit.
Okay, so Section A has really established the sheer breadth of these threats. Geopolitical disruption, mass PII theft, supply chain hopping, and targeted digital asset draining. That sets a crucial high-stakes context.
It does.
Now, let's pivot from these highly visible attacks to the quieter, more foundational flaws that are being discovered.
What's fascinating here is it's the continuous discovery of these high-impact flaws in widely used, absolute foundational infrastructure.
Right.
Before we dive into this specific AI vulnerability, it's vital to acknowledge that the traditional network and data storage layer risks, they haven't evaporated.
No, they're just operating alongside all the new AI threats.
Exactly. They are the background noise of RCE risk.
And our sources highlighted two critical examples that really demonstrate that traditional components, even ones we rely on every single day, still hold massive vulnerabilities that organizations have to race to patch. Let's start with a database flaw. The MongoDB vulnerability, which was dubbed MongoBleed. That's CVE 2025-12847.
This is a high-severity memory read vulnerability, and to understand it, we need to look at the root cause, which, interestingly, wasn't actually in MongoDB itself, but in a dependency.
Oh, another supply chain issue.
In a way, yes. It was in this lib implementation it uses. And lib is that ubiquitous compression library. I mean, it's everywhere in modern computing, silently handling data compression and decompression for us.
So an issue in a fundamental compression tool trickles up into one of the world's most critical database management systems. Yeah. What specifically went wrong in zlib?
The problem is categorized technically as CVE-130, which is improper handling of length parameter consistency.
Okay, in plain English.
In plain terms, when MongoDB was decompressing data it received from a client, the flaw allowed for improper handling of the length parameter. The system was essentially fooled about the size of the data package it was receiving.
And what's the consequence of that kind of confusion?
It allows an unauthenticated remote attacker to access uninitialized heap memory. Think of heap memory as the system's temporary scratch pad.
Okay.
If the attacker can force the system to read outside its designated boundary and access this uninitialized memory, they're essentially peeking into what the system was just working on, which could momentarily include keys, credentials, or pointers to more sensitive memory locations.
Which means a simple memory read vulnerability carries the significant risk of permitting arbitrary code execution and a full system compromise.
Exactly. Once you can read enough memory, you can start building an RCE exploit chain. The terrifying aspect here is the scope. The affected versions span from MongoDB 4.0 all the way through 8.2.3.
Wow, that's a huge range.
It's a classic case where a low-level implementation flaw in a foundational utility can open up a critical RCE risk across one of the world's most popular databases.
That sets the context for systemic risk at the database layer. Now let's move up the stack to network management. There was the Net SNMP buffer overflow, CVE 2025-68664. This one carries a CVSS score that demands instant attention.
A near-perfect score, CVSS 9.8, critical. This vulnerability targets Net SNMP and specifically the stem-trapped daemon.
For listeners who might not be familiar, can you explain what SNMP is?
Sure. SNMP, the Simple Network Management Protocol, is sort of the quiet administrative backbone of most enterprise networks. It's used for remote monitoring and configuration of devices.
So if the database is the heart, SNMP is like the nervous system, quietly communicating the state of all the devices on the network.
That's a great analogy. And a 9.8 score means an attacker doesn't need prior access or any credentials.
Right. That is correct. It is triggerable remotely and it's unauthenticated. The mechanism is a classic buffer overflow, which is triggered by a specially crafted packet sent directly to that stem-trapped daemon.
A buffer overflow. So the attacker sends too much data and it spills over. And it spills over, potentially overwriting adjacent memory space with their own malicious instructions.
And that is the path to full remote code execution, or at the very least, a catastrophic service crash.
The ability for an unauthenticated attacker to achieve RCE just by sending one specially crafted packet over the network. That is the definition of a critical flaw. Patches are available in NetSNMP versions 5.9.5 and 5.90.pre2, and every security team running this service must have them installed immediately.
So what these two examples, MongoBleed and the NetSNMP flaw, really show is that even as we focus on the novelty of AI, the fundamentals remain prime and very vulnerable targets.
They absolutely do.
That's crucial context.
Yep.
We are fighting a war on two fronts: the known high-severity flaws in legacy infrastructure and these emerging architectural flaws in cutting-edge AI frameworks. Now, with that context set, let's make that pivot. Let's dive deep into the AI infrastructure risk that is truly shaping the future threat landscape. We are now focusing on the core of this deep dive: the critical security flaw in the AI ecosystem, codenamed LangGrinch. This vulnerability, CVE-2025-68664, it impacts LangChain core.
A foundational Python package.
Yes, the base primitives for the entire LangChain ecosystem.
And to really understand the gravity of LangGrinch, you first have to grasp the scale of LangChain's deployment. It is essentially the de facto orchestration standard for agentic AI development.
Right. Its whole purpose is to help developers stitch together large language models, LLMs, with external data sources, with tools, with memory structures.
It's the glue.
It's the glue. And the numbers are just huge. The sources report something like 847 million total downloads.
Right. And nearly 100 million of those, around 98 million, were just in the last month.
Wow.
This flaw wasn't in some niche plugin. It was in the core package that forms the structural backbone for nearly everyone building complex AI applications today.
The risk is systemic.
Absolutely, which is why it earned a CVSS score of 9.3 critical. This isn't just a coding oversight that leads to a crash. It's a fundamental failure of architecture and trust boundaries. So let's get into the technical root cause: serialization injection.
Okay, this sounds dense, but it's central to the entire flaw. The vulnerability is categorized as CVE-502, deserialization of untrusted data. Can you break down what that term actually means conceptually?
Certainly, serialization fundamentally is the process of taking a complex, active software object, like an AI agent's memory, a conversation chain, or a configuration object, and turning it into a flat stream of data.
Usually JSON or something similar.
Usually JSON, exactly, so it can be saved or sent over a network or cached. And deserialization is just the reverse, taking that flat data and reconstructing the complex active object back in memory.
So it's kind of like saving your game state and then reloading the game later.
Precisely. That's a perfect analogy. Now, LangChain, like many object-oriented frameworks, it needs a way to distinguish its own legitimate internal structured objects from just arbitrary user data that might also be in JSON format.
Right. How does it do that?
It uses a special internal marker, the LC key.
The source has called this the LC marker. That's the key.
Yeah, it is the key. The framework treats the presence of that LC key as a proprietary seal, a sign that says this JSON object is one of ours, and it's safe to reconstruct the complex class it describes.
So it creates a trust invariant. If it has an LC key, the deserializer just assumes it's safe to load and instantiate whatever object it specifies.
Exactly. And this is where the trust boundary failed.
Okay, so if the LC key is the proprietary seal, how did an attacker get that seal onto their own unauthorized package?
Well, this is the really subtle part. The flaw wasn't in the loading phase, the deserialization, but in the preceding dumping or serialization functions, the dumps and dump functions.
So when it was saving the data, not when it was loading it.
Exactly. They failed to properly escape user-controlled dictionaries that just so happened to contain that reserved LC key when those dictionaries were being saved alongside other legitimate data.
Okay, let's use the package analogy here. The application is building a package for shipping, that's serialization. An attacker provides some user data, say, a message history entry that looks like arbitrary content, but secretly it contains that proprietary seal.
Right. And when the application serializes its state, it sees this user-provided data, and because the serialization function didn't properly escape it or sanitize it, it didn't treat it as just raw text. It passes through the system with that legitimate LC seal intact.
And then later,
when the system reloads this cached or transmitted data deserialization, it sees the seal, assumes the entire structure is a legitimate internal LangChain object, and then it attempts to instantiate the malicious object defined within that attacker-controlled structure.
which means an attacker can craft a dictionary that perfectly mimics a legitimate LangChain object, tricking the core framework into executing its construction logic.
And this leads immediately to the most damaging impact: secret extraction.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the default settings were basically handing the keys to the kingdom.
They really were. Prior to the patch, the load function defaulted to a truly dangerous setting, secrets from NVI.
True. Why on earth was that the default? Was that just a common practice in the early days of these AI frameworks?
It was a trade-off for convenience and rapid development. In development environments, it's just much faster to allow the framework to automatically resolve credentials, like API keys, directly from environment variables.
But when that setting is left true in production, it turns a convenience feature into a critical vulnerability.
It assumes that the data being loaded is always trusted, which is a fatal assumption.
So the attack vector is pretty simple then. The attacker just injects a specific serialized dictionary structure. What did that structure look like?
The researcher demonstrated that injecting something like LC1 type secret was sufficient.
That's it.
That's it. Upon deserialization, the system would interpret this as an instruction to read and return the value of the specified environment variable, which could be your OpenIPA key, your OSIKES key, your database password.
It's not the secret manager itself that breaks, but the agent framework using the secret manager, which is tricked into accessing it under false pretenses. That is a classic trust boundary collapse.
And we have to emphasize, these are the most critical secrets an organization possesses. An attacker who can extract these API keys can immediately pivot to abusing cloud resources, launching further attacks, or exfiltrating massive amounts of data.
Now, secret theft is catastrophic on its own, but the vulnerability didn't stop there. It enabled exploitation pathways that go beyond simple data theft, potentially leading to full remote code execution. What were those side effects?
So the deserializer did use an internal allow list to restrict which classes could be instantiated. However, that allow list was extensive.
So it was too permissive.
Way too permissive. It included classes from pre-approved trusted namespaces, like LangChain Core, LangChain Oz, LangChain AppNI. This still allowed for the arbitrary object instantiation of potentially dangerous classes within that trusted circle.
So while the attacker couldn't instantiate just any class in the system, they could instantiate classes that were part of the trusted library, even if those classes had dangerous constructors or side effects.
Exactly, and this led to a very subtle and stealthy form of exploitation: network side effects. The sources specifically pointed to classes used for interfacing with cloud services. Take, for instance, the ChatBedrock Converse class from the LangChain Oz package.
Okay, so what happens when an attacker forces the system to instantiate that specific class?
The construction process of that object, even before it's fully operational, triggers an attacker-controlled outbound JET request.
Yeah, an outbound JET request, so it's calling out of the system?
Yes. It's typically used for initialization or checking endpoints.
Yeah.
But the attacker controls the destination URL of that GET request.
And this is how they can get the secrets out without ever seeing the LLM's output.
Yes, this is the stealthy part. They can leverage the still-enabled secrets from end of feature, not to return the secret in the output, but to populate specific HTTP headers, like OSIX keybind, with the sensitive environment variable values during the connection setup.
So they force the system to silently dial home with the credentials embedded in the request headers of that network call.
Exactly. It completely bypasses any output restrictions.
That is an incredibly sophisticated method. If your security teams are only monitoring application logs or the LLM output, they would completely miss this exfiltration. The only place this shows up is in the network egress logs.
It's pure stealth. But the highest level of risk, of course, involves the code execution potential. One of the classes on that default allow list was prompt template. And this object supports Jinja 2 templates for dynamic content generation.
And Jinja 2, while it's powerful for templating, is infamous in security circles because it can be abused to run arbitrary Python code if it's not properly sandboxed.
That's the critical link. The attack chain goes like this. The attacker injects a malicious structure that forces the system to instantiate a prompt template object, and embedded within it is a dangerous Jinja 2 payload.
So the instantiation itself doesn't execute the RCE.
Correct. The danger is that a subsequent application call, one designed to render that template for any reason, would then trigger the execution of arbitrary Python code.
So the malicious data is now just sitting inside the application state like a ticking time bomb, waiting for the system to perform a standard action like logging or displaying the prompt.
Exactly. The vulnerability enables the placement of the bomb, and common application logic provides the trigger. This is why the risk level is so high. It's not just about one direct path. It's about compromising the integrity of the entire application state.
Let's talk about the most common way this malicious serialized data gets into the system in the first place. Because it's rarely a direct input of a JSON blob. It's through prompt injection.
Right, and this is the nexus of AI security and traditional AppSec. Attackers don't send raw JSON. They use clever text prompts to influence the large language model.
Mm.
The LLM then places the attacker-controlled text into structured fields that are part of its output fields, like additional warnings or response metadata.
And the agentic frameworks use those structured output fields for their own internal purposes.
Yes, like storing conversational memory, caching responses, providing event tracing data.
So they take these untrusted LM outputs, which are now tainted with the malicious structure, serialize them into a cache or a database, and then at some later point, the application uses a common framework feature like event streaming or loading message history, which triggers the dangerous deserialization.
And that's the attack.
The core lesson here must be shouted from the rooftops. LLM output is untrusted input. It is not just text. It must be viewed as a hostile data stream. If your framework treats portions of that output as structured objects that are later serialized and deserialized, you're inherently vulnerable to this type of injection.
And the sources confirm this. The researcher found 12 distinct vulnerable flows, all stemming from common use cases like how the framework handles event logs, message history, and data streaming features.
So these are not edge cases.
Not at all. They are central features of the LangChain architecture.
And just to confirm the architectural pattern risk here, the same serialization failure structure was also found in the parallel implementation, correct?
Yes, that is a vital point. A closely related serialization injection flaw was found in LangChain.js, the JavaScript implementation. That's tracked as CVE-2025-68664 with a CVSS score of 8.6.
So this confirms the risk isn't just a Python-specific bug.
No, it's a pattern risk. It's inherent in the core architectural concept of these multi-component agentic orchestration frameworks, which rely on these internal markers and object serialization for state management. The moment you try to save and reload complex object state based on an internal trust marker, and that marker can be faked by untrusted input, the entire system is exposed. So the immediate non-negotiable step for anyone using LangChain infrastructure was, of course, patching. The fixes were released in Python versions 1.2.5 and 0.3.81. Right. But what is far more important than the simple bug fix is how the LangChain team responded. They fundamentally hardened the default security posture of the entire framework.
They didn't just patch the leak, they changed the plumbing. And this resulted in several breaking changes for developers who were relying on those old, insecure defaults. What are the 3 key changes developers need to internalize?
Okay, the first and most immediate fix for the secret extraction risk was changing the default behavior for environment variable resolution. They changed secrets from runfo from true to a strict false.
That is massive. It means that the developer now has to make a conscious, explicit choice to turn this functionality on. It transitions the framework from being insecure by default to secure by default.
It forces accountability onto the user.
Exactly.
The second major change addressed that arbitrary object instantiation thread. They introduced a new mechanism called allowed objects. This enforces a strict allow list of classes that can be deserialized.
So even if an attacker manages to successfully inject a malicious serialized structure, the class they're trying to instantiate isn't explicitly on that allow list, the system will just refuse. It limits the blast radius significantly.
It does. And the default for allowed objects is now just core, which is the most conservative setting possible. They explicitly recommend that users should carefully specify any additional objects they need. This drastically reduces the attack surface for those side effects, like the stealthy network calls we discussed.
And the third major hardening effort,
That addressed the known remote code execution vector associated with templating.
the Jinja 2 problem.
The Jinja 2 problem. So there's a new init validator that blocks Jinja 2 templates by default. Given that Jinja 2 supports arbitrary Python code execution, the developers decided that allowing it by default in a context where serialized data might be untrusted was simply too great a risk.
So if you still need it,
If you still need Jinja 2 for your templates, you now have to consciously disable this security control, which means you're making a highly informed, explicit security decision.
these changes really force developers building agents to shift their trust model away from blind trust. And that brings us to the bigger, more strategic picture of AI governance.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the LangGrinch flaw is fundamentally a high-level supply chain security failure that was exposed at the AI orchestration layer. And the risk of AI-generated code is just, it's accelerating CASTAR ability to secure and govern it.
The sources we analyzed provided some incredible forward-looking context on the expected volume. By 2030, analysts are projecting that 95% of code will be AI-generated.
95%. And even today, in 2025, small, fast-moving startups are already reporting using AI for 90 to 95% of their development.
That volume creates a staggering security and oversight gap.
It's a chasm. While 95% of organizations rely on AI tools to generate code, whether that's Copilot, Claude, or custom models, our sources indicate that only 24% of those organizations apply comprehensive security, IP, and license evaluations to that generated code.
That 71-point chasm between reliance on AI code and security governance,
Yeah.
that's the new threat surface. And what does that gap look like in practice? It's massive dependency sprawl, where an AI pulls in libraries the human developers don't even know about.
Right, or it's the introduction of opaque third-party components that traditional security programs aren't designed to inventory. Worse, it's the potential for license contamination. If an LLM learns from a proprietary or a restricted repository and then generates code that looks similar, that company could face catastrophic IP and licensing issues down the line. The LangGrinch flaw highlighted that if we can't manage the known vulnerability risks, the unknown risks of AI code provenance are exponentially greater.
This just highlights a fundamental security governance failure. I mean, the LangChain flaw exposed the difficult questions that most security leaders cannot quickly answer.
These are the uncomfortable truths. Most leaders right now cannot quickly and confidently answer these questions. 1. Where are we using agents in production?
2. Which versions of these orchestration frameworks are deployed?
3. Which services consuming these agents have access to our most sensitive secrets? And 4. Most critically, where do LLM outputs cross security boundaries? Specifically, where do they move from a prompt into a serialized cache or a logging component or some other state management system?
If you can't answer those 4 questions, then advisories like the one for LangGrinch create absolute panic. You're forced into this manual, frantic search and remediation effort that takes days or weeks, rather than a controlled, automated deployment of patches.
And that time delay is what costs millions in a breach scenario. The lack of visibility and inventory of AI components is the fundamental architectural weakness that LangGrinch exploited.
So we need solutions that match the velocity and scale of AI development. What is the necessary path forward? What are the defensive strategies organizations must adopt to bridge that 71-point gap?
Well, the first essential change has to be to the fundamental trust model. You have to treat AI output like third-party software and enforce controls. Never assume the output of an LLM, even if it's supposed to be structured, is safe. It must pass through the same scrutiny as data arriving from an untrusted network boundary.
And given the sheer pace of code generation, dependency management has to become automated and continuous.
Absolutely. Organizations have to prioritize continuous monitoring. The data is clear on the benefit. Organizations with automatic continuous monitoring fix critical vulnerabilities within a day 60% of the time,
Compared to what, for those who don't?
compared to only 45% overall. That 15 percentage point difference in speed is the difference between a minor incident and a catastrophic data loss.
And that focus on automation also needs to extend to the supply chain documentation itself.
Correct. Organizations must start requiring and validating SBOMs, software bills of materials, not just for traditional software, but for AI components.
An AI SBOM seems much more complex.
It is. It includes not just code libraries, but model versions, training data sources, and provenance. The sources showed that organizations validating supplier SBOMs reported 63% higher preparedness to evaluate that third-party software. Without an SBOM, you are flying blind to the components and risks embedded in your AI stack.
Finally, humans simply cannot scale to review 95% AI-generated code. It's impossible. We need architectural solutions.
We do. Analysts are noting that we have to shift toward new architectures. This involves deploying diverse AI models, where one AI reviews the code generated by another AI for security flaws, correctness, and licensing issues. We need Model Context Protocol (MCP) automation to integrate security reviews directly into the development pipeline, automatically flagging and potentially even patching issues before deployment.
And the QA process needs to evolve too, right?
Yes, QA has to move beyond simple manual testing. We need to leverage AI-generated test cases and harnesses to explore these complex, vulnerable scenarios, like the serialization injection that human testers might easily miss. We have to fight the speed of AI development with the automation and intelligence of AI security tools.
So what does this all mean? It means the security battleground has decisively shifted to the level of core developer frameworks that power AI. LangGrinch is the perfect chilling case study of this.
It really is.
It demonstrates that these AI-powered applications, especially those relying on complex serialization and deserialization flows for memory and state, introduce new high-severity risks that our traditional AppSec models were just not designed to handle.
And the critical insight for you, the learner, is understanding that the quiet plumbing of the system, that architectural choice of how you save and reload objects, is now a major attack surface.
Right.
If a simple missing escape in a common function can expose every single API key to an attacker who is just injecting data via a routine LLM prompt, then every piece of data flow in an agentic framework must be rigorously scrutinized as a potential trust boundary violation.
And the security researcher who reported LangGrinch, Jordan Porritt, received a $4,000 bounty from LangChain.
Yes, and that was the maximum amount ever awarded by the project for vulnerability.
$4,000.
That amount is a striking public quantification of the extreme value placed on finding and fixing these architectural flaws in core AI infrastructure. It reflects the realization that a flaw of this magnitude, if it were exploited widely, could undermine the security of hundreds of thousands of AI applications instantly.
So, if the price for discovering a flaw that exposes the core of the world's most deployed AI framework is $4,000, a figure that is, let's be honest, modest compared to potential damage, what is the unseen accumulating risk of the thousands of smaller, unpatched vulnerabilities lurking in custom proprietary AI applications right now?
The ones that don't have a dedicated security team or a public bounty program scrutinizing them.
Exactly. That is the hidden compounding cost of prioritizing speed over foundational security governance.